Good evening, friends. Good evening, friends. If we could ask everyone to take their seats, we'll get started. Distinguished guests, Holocaust survivors, colleagues and friends, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's panel discussion, Holocaust Remembrance Today, a Living Responsibility. And we have an exceptional panel this evening of distinguished scholars, and of course, we have a very special guest, Ms. Elżbieta Fikowska, who is a Holocaust survivor, who will be part of our panel. And before we get started this evening, we have a very special presentation on behalf of New York City Hall. We have a special City Council citation, which Brendan Fay will now be offering.
Good evening. My name is Brendan Fay, and it is a great honor to share on behalf of the New York City Council this citation from the Speaker Julie Menon, of course, who made history as the first Jewish Speaker of the New York City Council. Whereas this is for Elżbieta Fikowska. In observing International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we reaffirm our responsibility to remember, to educate, and to confront anti-Semitism, hatred, and the dehumanization that makes atrocity possible. Now, therefore, be it resolved that in observance of the International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, the New York City Council gratefully honors Elżbieta Fikowska for her extraordinary life and her enduring work to preserve memory, educate future generations, and affirm the dignity of every human being. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand, Julie Menon, Speaker of the New York City Council, January 27, 2026. Thank you, Elżbieta, for being a beacon of hope and light, and transforming your own trauma and pain into a call to all of us to awaken compassion and the courage to be brave when the moment calls us. We love you, we thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję z całego serca.
I am very touched and very honored, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Rozumiem, że to ten honor, wielki honor, i dziękuję miastu, dziękuję Nowemu Jorkowi za to, że dostałam taki wspaniały prezent, taką niespodziankę, że jest to też przeznaczone dla wszystkich uratowanych żydowskich dzieci i mam przekonanie, że przyjmuję to w ich imieniu i w imieniu tych wszystkich wspaniałych ludzi, odważnych, szlachetnych, dzięki którym te były dzieci żydowskie żyją.
I thank you very much, New York, for this honor, for this gift, for this surprise. It will be a beautiful gift not only for me, but for all the children of the Holocaust and for those beautiful people who helped them live.
Dziękuję bardzo.
New York with the light of your witness and love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brendan Fay, for that amazing presentation. And I also just take a moment to thank Piotr Piwowarczyk and also Joanna Orwo-Supiu for the translation. Friends, as I mentioned, my name is Jayashri Wyatt. I'm the chief of the Education Outreach section in the United Nations Department of Global Communications. And in the section is placed the Holocaust and the United Nations Outreach Program. And this program was established by all the member states of the United Nations through a General Assembly resolution. And it was the same resolution that designated 27 January as the annual International Day of commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. And as the name of the program indicates, the task of this program is to facilitate global outreach about the Holocaust. And one of the ways that the program does this is by organizing the 27 January commemoration in the General Assembly Hall at the United Nations every year. And this Tuesday, we were graced by 4 survivors from the Ukraine, from Poland, from Germany, and from Austria. They spoke alongside the United Nations Secretary General, the President of the General Assembly, and the permanent representatives of Israel, the United States, and others. Partnerships with institutions engaged in the work of the Holocaust are vital to all of us. This history belongs to everyone. And thus, we are extremely pleased that this evening's program is a collaborative event between 5 organizations: the United Nations, YIVO, Institute for Jewish Research, the Center for Jewish History, and the Sousa Mendes Foundation. And we especially thank the Center for Jewish History and YIVO for hosting us. This place, this auditorium where people in New York can come and learn about this history, is such an important institution in New York City and indeed the world. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Alex Weiser. He is the Director of Public Programs, YIVO Institute for Jewish Research.
Thank you very much, Jayashri. And thank you to the Holocaust and the United Nations Outreach Program, to the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, the Sousa Mendes Foundation, and the Center for Jewish History for creating this program with us. We're grateful to be joined by all of today's illustrious panelists and all of you in the audience, both here in person as well as online. It's particularly meaningful for YIVO to host this evening because we ourselves are an institution which survived the Holocaust. YIVO was founded in 1925 with its headquarters in what was then Vilna, Poland, it's now Vilnius, Lithuania. It was created to be a kind of Library of Congress for the Jewish people, a place where material could be collected and Jewish history, culture, folklore, and language could be studied. YIVO's European life was cut short because of the Soviet and Nazi occupations of Vilna. During the war, the Nazis looted YIVO's materials, sending crates of documents and books to Germany and destroying countless other materials. Almost all of YIVO's pre-war staff were murdered. Thanks to the US Army recovering these materials after the war, as well as the heroic efforts of a group in the Vilna ghetto known as the Paper Brigade, who risked their lives to smuggle and hide additional YIVO materials during and after the war, about 1 million pages of archival materials and tens of thousands of books from YIVO's pre-war collections survived and were sent to YIVO's branch in New York, which became its headquarters in 1940. We call this our Vilna collection. In early 2022, we completed a 7-year and $7 million project to digitize these materials, along with additional YIVO materials which were discovered in Vilnius as the Soviet Union opened up and collapsed in the late 1980s and early 1990s. All of this material is now online and freely accessible anywhere in the world. After the war, YIVO continued its work to document Jewish history with calls for materials related to Jewish life under Nazi occupation and life in the post-war displaced persons camps and more. As a result, YIVO has close to 7 million pages of primary source material related to the Holocaust. It's the largest collection of such material outside of Yad Vashem. In addition to making these materials available to researchers around the world, YIVO does extensive Holocaust education work through programs like this, through our courses, exhibitions, and our online museum, which has 2 exhibitions which tell the story of Jewish youth during the Holocaust. Bebe Epstein and Yitzchak Rudashevsky are the 2 focuses of these exhibitions. So we have a program ahead of us, but I just want to say thank you all so much again for joining us, and I hope you find tonight's program to be a meaningful and thought-provoking one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, for that really extraordinary history that you shared with us about YIVO. This evening's discussion is in conjunction with the exhibition Between Life and Death, Stories of Rescue During the Holocaust, curated by the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, known as ENRS, in cooperation with the Poland Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw and the Silent Heroes Memorial Center in Berlin. The exhibition is currently on display at the United Nations headquarters here in New York City. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Rafał Rogowski, Director of the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, to say a few words.
Thank you, Jeshri. Ladies and gentlemen, it is always good to be in New York. Beautiful, exciting city. I'm representing the institution which is responsible for the exhibition Between Life and Death, opened yesterday at the UN headquarters. The exhibition was prepared by our institution together, as was said, with the Museum of Polish History, Museum of Polish Jews in Warsaw, Silent Heroes Memorial Center in Berlin, and in cooperation with more than a dozen institutions from Europe, Japan, and USA. Since 2018, it has traveled around the world to many European cities and also to Japan. Tonight, 2 days after the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we, ENRS, together with our partners institutions, YIVO, Center for Jewish History, the Holocaust and United Nations Outreach Program, and the Sousa Mendes Foundation, have invited distinguished speakers to talk about the significance of the memory of the Holocaust today, here and now, in the world that is rapidly changing. Among other things, we would like to reflect on how this changing international context, including Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the events of the last several months in Israel and Gaza, will affect the memory on the Holocaust and the memory on the Second World War. planning today's discussion, we intended to show a broad perspective to show as broad perspective as possible. So we include both witness of history and scholars of 20th century history with experience of both creating historical museums, exhibitions, and conducting other projects aimed at preserving memory and providing history through historical education. So I'm quite sure that the discussion will be inspiring and interesting for you. I wish you a good discussion, good impressions, and thank you very much for inviting us to this beautiful place, beautiful and very important place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rafał. It is now my pleasure to call on Dr. Olivia Mattis. She is the president of the Mendes Sousa Foundation to say a few brief remarks. And the foundation has generously sponsored this evening's reception, so we thank them for that as well.
Thank you, Jayashree. And I'm delighted to have the Sousa Mendes Foundation associated with today's event. And I thank my friend, Dr. Yael Danieli, for making the shidduch. The Sousa Mendes Foundation is a nonprofit organization founded in 2010, devoted to honoring the memory of the Holocaust hero and rescuer, Aristides de Sousa Mendes. He was the Portuguese consul general stationed in Bordeaux, France, in 1940, and he saved thousands of Jewish refugees and others by giving them visas to Portugal against the explicit orders of his government. One of those that he saved was my father, who was 7 years old at the time and is now 93, thanks to the action of Aristides de Sousa Mendes. Sousa Mendes was harshly punished, fired, blacklisted, and was never able to work again. He died in poverty and obscurity in 1954, but satisfied that he had fulfilled his moral duty. Our duty, therefore, is to honor him. You are all here today because you are interested in the subject of rescue during the Holocaust. I invite you to join us online on Sunday afternoons for our film and discussion series on inspiring true stories of rescue, resistance, and hope. For all of you teachers in the audience, classroom teachers, museum docents, or any other educators who interact with young people in connection with this history, come join us in Portugal this coming July for our second annual Educators Institute on rescue and resistance during the Holocaust. Come learn from an all-star faculty, including Dr. PALDIEL here on our stage, and travel throughout the beautiful country of Portugal. Our home base will be the recently inaugurated Aristides de Sousa Mendes Museum, co-developed by the Sousa Mendes Foundation, and named by the New York Times in 2025 as one of 52 places in the world to visit. We would love to have you join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and especially for sharing your personal story as well. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this evening's discussion, Dr. TRACEY Petersen. She is the manager of the United Nations Holocaust and Srebrenica Genocide Outreach Programs, developing educational resources supporting the UN's fight against anti-Semitism and intolerance. Previously, Dr. Petersen served as education director at the Cape Town Holocaust Center, leading teacher training in post-apartheid South Africa. She holds a PhD in history from the University of the Western Cape and an MPhil in education from the University of Cape Town, and she is a Salzburg Global Seminars Fellow. Ms. Petersen, TRACEY, the floor is yours. Over to you and this very distinguished panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayashri, for those very kind words. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to talk about memory, remembrance, and the relationship between memory and history, and how the memory of the past engages with the contemporary moment. We'll look specifically at rescue during the Holocaust and the significance of the memory and history of rescue when considering the Holocaust, and ask what role should stories of rescue and moral courage play alongside the narratives of persecution and loss. Here in 2026, we stand at a critical juncture in how we remember the Holocaust, as the generation of survivors, the first-hand witnesses of the Holocaust, grow fewer in number. How can Holocaust remembrance remain vital and meaningful in an increasingly digital age? Over the next 40 to 50 minutes, we'll explore these questions through 4 themes: the increasing shift from living witness to institutionalized memory, the role of rescue in Holocaust remembrance, the challenges of the digital age and rising anti-Semitism, and finally, what remembrance might look like in the future. To discuss these questions, we have, as Jayashri's already indicated, an exceptional panel bringing together personal testimony, historical scholarship, and deep expertise in commemoration. Ms. Elżbieta I practiced, I really did. Wieczałska is a Holocaust survivor who was rescued as an infant from the Warsaw Ghetto. Her testimony provides an irreplaceable connection to this history. Sitting next to her over there is Ms. Johanna Orłaś-Supu, who will kindly interpret for us. And behind her, behind Elżbieta, is Peter, whom Jayashri has already acknowledged. Nearest the lectern is Professor Jay Winter. Jay is the Charles J. Still Professor of History Emeritus at Yale University and a leading historian of war and memory. His groundbreaking work on remembrance, commemoration, and the transmission of traumatic memory across generations has shaped our understanding of how societies come to terms with mass death. Next to Jay is Professor Daniel Blattman, who is a historian of the Holocaust and professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. His research on Jewish resistance, the death marches, and the final phases of the Holocaust has fundamentally enriched our understanding of Jewish agency and the complexity of survival during the genocide. Right next to me is Dr. MORDECAI PALDIEL, who served for 24 years as director of the Department of the Righteous Among the Nations at Yad Vashem. Through his work documenting thousands of rescue cases, he has become a foremost authority on those who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Together, I'm sure you will agree that together our panel brings a remarkable breadth of perspective to our discussion. Now, before we begin, I wanted to say that you may wish to pose a question. In fact, we very much hope you will. And if you do, please would you write that on one of the index cards that you would have picked up when you entered the auditorium. Don't worry if you didn't. I'm sure you have your program or something to write on. And towards the end, we will again hand out more cards if you need. Please would you write clearly and briefly your question, and then at the top just note who the question is for. We'll collect the cards in about 40 minutes. Let us begin, if you will, by considering the dialogue of memory between those who witnessed and experienced the history and those who did not, and for whom the distance between past and present grows ever greater. And so I'd like to turn first to Elżbieta. Elżbieta, we are so pleased to have you with us, and thank you for traveling all the way from Poland to be with us. Elżbieta, you were rescued from the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942, an infant carrying the full impact of the Holocaust. First, please tell us how you came to learn about your rescue, and then what from your experience do you believe is most vital for younger generations to understand the Holocaust?
Proszę Państwa, to dla mnie wielki zaszczyt, że ja tutaj jestem. I to nie pierwszy raz. Pierwszy raz byłam w YIVO w 1977 roku.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a great honor for me that I'm here, but it's not the first time I'm at YIVO. I was here for the first time in 1977.
Pracował tu wtedy przyjaciel mojego męża i bardzo dobry mój znajomy, profesor Lucjan Dobroszycki.
A great friend of my husband worked here, a great specialist, Lucjan Dobroszycki.
Lucjan Dobroszycki przyjął mnie w Nowym Jorku, a ja później pojechałam na Florydę, bo tam odnalazł się brat rodzony mojego dziadka żydowskiego, którego nazywałam dziadkiem, bo też chciałam mieć jakiegoś dziadka, jak wszyscy ludzie.
Lucjan Dobroszycki was my host in New York, and later I went to Florida because luckily a brother of my grandfather invited me there. I was found by me in Florida. I called him granddad, although he wasn't really my granddad in the straight line.
Ale zanim pojechałam na Florydę, odwiedziłam profesora Lucjana Dobroszyckiego tu, w YIVO.
But before I went there, I visited Professor Lucjan Dobroszycki here at YIVO.
On szukał dokumentów ze mną związanych i znalazł.
He was searching for the documents about me, and he found them.
Znalazł korespondencję, ja już nie pamiętam, jak się nazywała ta instytucja, która korespondowała z moją mamą przybraną.
He found some correspondence, I don't remember really the name of the institution, that corresponded with my mom.
Ja wtedy miałam 5 lat.
I was 5 then.
I dowiedziałam się właśnie tu od profesora Dobroszyckiego, że postanowiono zabrać mnie do Nowego Jorku i nawet była już rodzina, która chciała mnie tutaj adoptować, żydowska rodzina.
On the basis of this correspondence, I found out that it was decided that as a child I go to New York and a family was prepared to take me.
Gdyby tak się stało, moje życie byłoby zupełnie inne. Mieszkałabym teraz tu razem z państwem i pewnie mówiłabym po angielsku.
If it had happened, my life would be very different. I would probably live in New York here with you and I would speak English.
Chciałam jeszcze powiedzieć, że ja się dowiedziałam o mojej historii, kiedy miałam 17 lat.
I found about my story when I was 17.
Ja nie wiedziałam, kim są Żydzi, ani jak wyglądają.
I did not know who the Jews were or what they looked like.
To był przypadek. Zwykle takie ważne wiadomości spadają na nas jakimś przypadkiem, który jest zupełnie nieprzewidziany.
I found out by accident. Usually all important things that we find out in our lives happen to come by accident to our knowledge.
Kiedy rozmawiam z młodzieżą, a często mnie zapraszają na rozmowy, to rozmawiamy o tym i pytam ich, no co byście zrobili, gdybyście w wieku 17 lat dowiedzieli się, że wszystko, co o sobie wiecie, jest nieprawdą, że to wszystko było nie tak, że wasza ukochana mama wcale was nie urodziła.
I very often talk to young people, and sometimes I ask them what would they do if this kind of situation happened to them, if they found out that their beloved mom didn't give birth to them.
To było ciężkie przeżycie, ale głównie dlatego, znaczy reakcja była taka, jaka jest kochanego dziecka, kochającego swoich rodziców, z tym, że ja miałam tylko mamę, który się dowiaduje, że jest adoptowany.
This situation was very difficult for me, but I accepted it as any child who feels the love from his or her parents. In my case, it was only the mother.
No i wtedy z tymi dziećmi zastanawiamy się, one się zastanawiają, jak by zareagowały i co by z tym zrobiły.
I talked to these young people about this situation, and they think how they would react if this kind of story happened to them.
I wtedy dochodzimy wspólnie do wniosku, że wszędzie, wszyscy ludzie na całym świecie są tacy sami.
And then we all together come to the conclusion that in the whole world, all the people are the same.
Że nie ma narodów lepszych i gorszych, że nie ma narodów bohaterów i narodów złoczyńców.
That there are no nations who are better and those who are worse, then there are no nations of the perpetrators and or the evil or the heroes.
Że w każdym narodzie są ludzie dobrzy i są ludzie źli, są ludzie mądrzy i są ludzie głupi. Wszystko zależy od tego, na kogo trafimy.
That there are people who are wise and who are not wise in every nation. Those who are good and who are bad.
Ale skoro mówimy już o narodach, a ja mówię o moich rozmowach z młodzieżą, to przypominam im, że to 2 narody wtedy przez Hitlera zostały skazane na całkowite nieistnienie.
While we talk, I talk to these young people, I always remind them that there were 2 nations that were deemed to perish by Hitler.
To były 2 narody. To był naród żydowski i naród cygański. W takiej samej mierze byli skazani na Holocaust.
2 nations, and by that I mean the Jews and the Roma people.
Ja obiecałam moim cygańskim przyjaciołom, że ja o tym powiem, jak będę w Nowym Jorku i jak będę z państwem rozmawiała.
And I promised my Roma friends to tell you about it, to remind this fact in New York when I speak to you.
O tym się nie mówi, dlatego że Cyganie, naród koczowniczy, wędrowali i nie mogli chodzić do szkoły, nie uczyli się i nie zapisywali tego, co się wtedy działo.
We don't remember about it because Roma or the Gypsies, they were travelers. There are no documents. They very often were illiterate. They didn't leave any testimonies about what happened to them.
I skoro już tu jestem, to chciałam powiedzieć, że mam przesłanie do świata jako osoba, która była w tym piekle, która tego nie zobaczyła, bo miała 6 miesięcy, ale przeżyła to i straciła wszystkich najbliższych.
And my message, because I'm here and I want to deliver the message to the world, because I went through the hell, although as a baby, I didn't know that it was a hell. But I want to pass on the message.
Marzę sobie o tym, żeby świat wreszcie oprzytomniał, żeby ludzie przestali się zabijać i przestali wyrywać sobie jakieś materialne rzeczy. W tym przypadku najczęściej chodzi o jakieś kawały ziemi, które trzeba wyrwać sąsiadowi i w związku z tym iluś ludzi zamordować. Po co? Przecież oni tego nie zabiorą ze sobą, jak będą ten świat opuszczali. To nie ma żadnego sensu.
And I wish that the nations stop fighting at last, usually over some pieces of land. This fight does not matter for me because as people were born with nothing and we will not take anything with us, so why to fight?
Obiecałam też, że powiem o Ukrainie i chcę powiedzieć, że Ukrainie trzeba pomagać. Ukrainie trzeba pomagać, żeby świat nie zginął.
And I promised also I'll talk about Ukraine because Ukraine needs our help. Without Ukraine, the world will perish.
Dziękuję.
Thank you.
So as we can see, we can tell the power of having lived through something and then being able to talk to it. But some of you may not be aware of the fact that Elżbieta's life or death depended on the courage not only of those who rescued her, but also of her parents who decided to put a 6-month-old infant into a box that was then smuggled out of the Warsaw Ghetto. And you can find out more about that story in the exhibition. I want to just turn now to MORDECAI. I want you to, you've, as we heard, your experience, you had so many years working with through cases at the Writers Among the Nations program, determining who would actually qualify, if you like, for lack of word. But I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that question. Why did some people choose to rescue Jews? When you were going through all these documents, did you find any patterns in that seemed to reoccur, that seemed to motivate people? Were there some people more likely to do it? What did you notice in the years of going through the different cases?
Okay, that's a very good question. Now, it's a very mixed story. I want to point out that on the Jewish victims, the Jews who tried to save themselves, in most of the cases that we honored righteous Gentiles, the Jewish persons, they made the first step. What do I mean by that? They knew some of the people, some of the non-Jewish people. They knew them from before the war. They had some relations. And so they addressed them. They asked for help. They came to them. It was like almost a face-to-face encounter. And the question is not usually, can you help me to survive the war? No. The question was, I need a place where to stay overnight. 1 night, 2 nights. And then I'll figure out, but I need to stay someplace overnight. Can I do that? And the answer is, well, sure. I know you. Oh, yes, for 1 or 2 nights, it's very dangerous. But okay, for 1 or 2 nights. And then the 2 nights stretched into a few more nights. And then they got too close to each other. And eventually, it stretched for longer periods. In some cases, the Jewish persons left and they went to another place. So there was a face-to-face encounter with usually in most cases, with people whom they knew from before the war. It doesn't mean that they were friends with each other or they were culturally attached to each other, but they had some connection. It could have been a business connection. It could have been another connection. So they approached not just anyone on the street, but they approached people whom they knew from before. In some isolated cases, when the Jewish side ran out of options, they knocked on the door. When they escaped in villages, like in Poland, and they had no other outlet, and they were starving, they would go to a village and seek out the home which was far away from the village, the last home, They would knock on the door. Can I stay here can you give me some food? And the wonder of wonders, that sometimes led to the person, the Polish family, saying, how many are you? And they would say, I have me and my wife. My wife is right behind the shack in this. And they would be invited to stay there and give them food and so on. And that could stretch for a longer period. So there was that face-to-face encounter. I wish to add something else, and I'm not going to take too long. When we talk about the rescuers and we talked about the risks, believe me, we don't know what motivated them to help. Psychologists and sociologists have made all kinds of inquiries. Most of the rescuers, if you had asked them before the war, would you be prepared to risk your life and that of your family to save somebody else, the Jewish person? The answer would have been no. My first duty is to my family. I regret what's happening to the Jews, but why should I risk my life? That's somebody else. That would have been the answer, which goes hand in hand with human nature. You worry about yourself, and that's why you attract the attention of the Nazis. But here what happened was during the war, when all the rules of civilization have changed, and there was that person-to-person encounter. Now, when you look the other person in the eyes, and he wants to survive, and you are a potential rescuer, and you know that person wants to survive, and somebody wants to kill him, not because he committed any crime, but simply because he was born. He didn't commit any crime, and you know that person. It's very hard to say no. It's very hard. Some said no. They were afraid because of German retribution. And so the answer was, come in, let's talk, have something to eat. We'll discuss it, maybe one night, maybe 2 nights. And later on, they would build a bunker, a shack, and they would find ways. So the face-to-face encounter is very important in trying to understand some of the motivations of most rescuers. Thank you.
And of course, what the history of the Holocaust illuminates so terribly, painfully, is the process of deliberate dehumanization of people. And so just to your point, why it is so powerful to when human beings see the human in the other. I want to turn to Daniel for the next question. Daniel, as anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial persist and even resurge in some contexts, what responsibility do historians have in shaping public remembrance? How do you navigate the tension between scholarly rigor and public engagement? I wonder if you could just say a few words on that.
Thank you for this question, which is not very easy to answer. But since we got the questions in advance, I prepared something, and I hope it will be, it will give us some aspects of reflection. Well, I don't think that anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial should be discussed in the same breath. It is true that some people do this, often for clear political reasons. Holocaust denial became almost marginal already in the 1950s and 1960s. It was linked to fringe groups in Western societies or to eccentric figures, including in the academia, like Robert Faurisson in France in the 1980s, or David Irving in Britain in this famous trial in 2000. In Sweden, there are still people like Ahmad Ram and the Radio Islam milieu. And of course, there were extreme politicians who used it. Their influence was limited. And even today, Holocaust denial is not present among many of the people that Israeli government, its supporters or representatives label as anti-Semites. Anti-Semitism, of course, exists. Sometimes it erupts in harsh and terrible violence, like we saw recently in Sydney. We see it among different groups, including radical Islamic circles. But not everyone who protests today, actively, even violently, against Israel is anti-Semitic. So I think we should understand carefully the current rise of anti-Semitism in Western societies, unless we redefine the word. If every legitimate criticism of what Israel has done in the last 2 years in Gaza is called anti-Semitism, then anti-Semitism is everywhere. That includes criticism by human rights organizations or humanitarian organizations. It even includes judges in the international courts in The Hague. But if that is the definition, the word loses meaning. And when the word loses meaning, Jews becomes less protected, not more. This affects Holocaust memory in a dangerous way, to my opinion. For many Jews, especially in Israel, that's my country, of course, you can listen, the world is now divided into anti-Semites, Hamas supporters, and Holocaust deniers on one side, and unconditional supporters of Israel on the other. But Holocaust memory long ago became universal, not only Jewish, and definitely not Israeli. A liberal person in Europe or in North America may be naturally sympathetic of Israel, even if they never agreed with every policy. Today, they face an impossible choice. If I criticize Israel, I'm an anti-Semite. If I support Israel without limits, I betray my universal and liberal principles. This is exactly how you lose the public, especially the young generation. And that loss will shape, I believe, Holocaust remembrance in the future.
Can I say something about remembrance?
I'm reminding you that you have cards on which to write. So we're having very interesting input. Please feel free to write those questions. I want to turn to Jay to pick up the relationship between memory and remembrance and history. Where do these meet? Because sometimes we talk about remembrance and memory all in the same breath, but could you talk a little bit about what's the difference? Where do they meet?
Well, the place to start, I think, is to recognize that the word remembrance is a process and the product is memory. Remembrance is a social act and it involves groups of people, and it starts off in families. I think it was evident that one of the facets of Elżbieta's story is that it's a family story. In fact, it's a two-family story that merged because of the cruelty of the Holocaust. And memory starts the stories that we know about who we are in our families. So the first point to recognize is that remembrance is a social process that starts when we're very young and continues throughout our lives. The second thing is, because memory is embedded in identity, is that it is paradoxically always about the future. Memory, which you would imagine is about the past, is actually about where we're going, not where we come from. And when we decide to go somewhere else, we change the story that leads somewhere else, the story of who we are and who we are becoming. Now, the reason why I think this matters very much and why it is perfectly fitting for an organization called the European Network of Remembrance and Solidarity to be hosting this meeting is that remembrance is a social fact that all of us share. And it has appeared at certain moments of time as traumatic memory. Holocaust remembrance is traumatic. The problem with that term is that it describes, as Freud wrote, and as many others have written, narratives that are impossible to integrate into our identity. A traumatic memory is something that destroys our sense of self, not reinforces it. And hence, the Holocaust is a very clear example of a traumatic memory that cannot be fully shared by those who didn't go through it. This, to me, is one of the reasons why the universalization of Holocaust remembrance is a dangerous phenomenon. Because what it does is to suggest that traumatic memory that I believe is shared by those who went through it and know that very well is not the same as sympathy or empathy for those who went through the trauma. Europe, in my view, or the world, does not share the traumatic memory of the Jewish people. It may valorize, value, and maintain that experience, but it's not the same. And children need to know, it's been my lifetime's work for 50 years as a teacher, to make people realize that those who have gone through traumatic experience have memories that they may not even be able to integrate into their own language and their stories, and we should not presume that we share them. We can't presume that we share them. What we should do is what we're doing this evening, is to honor them, and to honor them in ways that affirm our common humanity. So the fundamental point that I want to suggest is that the business of remembrance is almost always about families. And the final point that I want to suggest is that embedded in almost every tradition that I know anything about, and probably in lots that I don't know anything about, is that remembrance and mourning are part of the same process. Think of Antigone for a moment. Think of Sophocles. Think of societies that recognize that honoring your family dead is the fundamental principle of civilization. Honoring family memory is what we all do, and that is fundamental. And to honor these individuals like Elżbieta, or the part of my mother's family that was wiped out in the Warsaw Ghetto, we must recognize that Holocaust traumatic memory is unique. It is embedded in people's lives and is transmitted through what is now called post-memory to their children and to their grandchildren. That's the last point I wanted to make. Memory is generational. I was born in 1945. My mother's family wiped out in the Warsaw Ghetto, didn't have the chance of being put in a box. They all went. The fundamental issue, I think, that we should realize is that that generation of survivors had silences embedded in their understanding and in their language of what had happened to them. Some of them could never cope with it. And that led a second generation of those carrying Holocaust memory to be very conflicted about what to say and what to do. The people who have made Holocaust remembrance universal are the grandchildren, the third generation, those who have the nerve to say, grandfather, what happened? Which the difficult generation in the middle frequently never asked. So I feel optimistic about Holocaust remembrance as a fundamental moral act, as long as we realize is that it doesn't belong to everybody. The memory of the Holocaust is unique. The remembrance of the Holocaust is a moral universal necessity. Thank you.
I know that Mordecai would like to add something, but before we go to Mordecai and then we're going back to Elżbieta, I would like to, if you are ready to hand your card in with your question, please raise your hand because we're going to go over to Q&A. If you would like to have a card because you missed out on one, just also indicate that, and these cards will be collected. So, Mordecai, you wanted to add something about...
Yes, I would like to say something about remembrance. Remembrance. All of us here in this audience, we are here today because we remember, we were educated to remember our past. I mean, the human species is different from the animal species. we can pass on what we learned and what we hoped and what we inspire to the next generation, and then they can take it further. So remembrance is very important. That's what civilization is all about. In the Jewish religion, we celebrate Passover because we were freed as slaves, and that happened thousands of years ago, but that is the inspiring message. Well, then we have the Holocaust, and the Holocaust shows us something else. It shows us man at his worst. Man is a demon. It goes against all the traditions of morals and ethics of civilization. Now, how are we going to pass this on? And I struggle with that. And I worked at Yad Vashem. And I came to the conclusion, I was happy to work in the department of the righteous Gentiles, the righteous among the nations. We have to show through examples, real examples, not theoretical examples, that people can act differently. They can uphold the values of humanity, and not because somebody told them to do this. In fact, somebody told them, don't do it, don't get involved. But they decided they were going to do it, although they could pay a big price. They could lose their life. And that's important. That's the message to the generation after the Holocaust. We're no longer going to be there. I'm a child survivor, but for my children and my grandchildren, I want them to hold up the lamp that it's possible to be a mensch, even in systems like the Nazi terror. And because we have live examples, we have thousands of such examples. Mrs. Fichowska spoke a lot about her and so on. But I would like to speak more about the lady that saved her, Stanislava Bussolt, that raised her. She didn't have to do it. She was 55 years old. She had already children of her own. And she took a baby. In Poland, she could have lost her life from the Germans. And she did it. She belonged to an organization called Żygota. And Żygota was inspired by a lady called Zofia Kosak. And Zofia Kosak was not so friendly to Jews. But she decided one cannot be indifferent to what was happening in Poland when the Germans were killing Jews, and one had to speak up and do something. And she went ahead and created this organization, Polish organization, clandestine, called Żygota. That's the code word. And the code word. And they saved thousands of Jews. And that's the message. These are examples. These are live stories that happened. These are not fictional stories. And therefore, we have to uphold the message. And there were thousands of people in Poland and France and everywhere. We even have Germans who saved Jews. At Yad Vashem, we have over 500 Germans that were honored by Yad Vashem. Of course, we have over 6,000 Poles that were honored because there were more Jews living in Poland and had to be saved. And in Poland, they saved more risk than any other countries, the Polish rescuers. But they did it. They decided to save. Did they do it because they knew that we were going to speak about them tonight? No. Did they do it because Yad Vashem was going to honor them? Yad Vashem did not yet exist. But they did it, and they saved lives, not because of the medal they were going to get. So we have these stories is something, when we talk about the Holocaust, we don't have to stop with Hitler and Eichmann and Mengele. We don't stop with this, because that's the wrong message that we're passing on to our children. That man is an animal. That man only cares for himself and he kills. And that's not what civilization is all about. Civilization has positive messages to pass on. Ethical, moral. That's what the Bible is all about. If there are any Christians in the audience, you know the story of the Good Samaritan that Jesus said. And that story is being told in all the churches. The Good Samaritan, who saved one Jewish person. So that's why it's important to talk about the rescuers when we talked about the Holocaust. I want to finish by saying, when I came to Yad Vashem in 1982, and they said, Mordecai, you're the head of the righteous among the nations of the department, okay? But don't talk so much about this. Why? Because we have to talk about the Holocaust. We have to talk about Auschwitz, about the Einsatzgruppen, about the gas chambers. So I said, yes, we have to talk about Auschwitz and so on. But when we talk about the righteous among the nations, we're talking about the Holocaust. Because the righteous among the nations saved Jews whom the Nazis wanted to kill for no reason, for no pragmatic reason, and they saved them. So there was a Holocaust. So those who deny the Holocaust, then they deny the rescuers. So we have to talk about them, and that tells the story of the Holocaust, but that also tells the story of humanity at its best. So I belong to the Sousa Mendes organization, and we have Aristides Sousa Mendes, a Portuguese diplomat stationed in Bordeaux, France. And he saved thousands of Jews by just putting a stamp on their passport, which made it possible for them to head to Portugal and get out. And he did it in violation of orders that he gave from his government, that he received from his government, not to give out visas to Jews. So I'm finished and I'm saying, we are talking not about saints, but about saintly deeds, And that is very important when we talk about the Holocaust, not to stop at Hitler, Eichmann and Mengele, but to talk about the righteous among the nations.
Okay, so we have questions, and this is the best thing. We have our panelists who want to engage. So I'm going to I'm going to give Daniel a chance to respond, and then I would like to look at some of the questions that we have here. So.
Okay, one of the questions, one of the issues that we asked to address, and Jay already started, is the question of remembrance, of course. And you said, and I mean, you wrote about it a lot, about what you said, the memory belongs to the future. So I want to say something, or a few things about the future, Holocaust remembrance, Holocaust memory in the future, but from this different direction. And I want to maybe address the dangers of this remembrance. Not from the universal point of view, but from the Jewish point of view. And mainly from the Israeli point of view. So as historians, as you know, we don't like to talk about the future. I mean, it's too risky for us to predict the future. But there's an online, a very famous line, also usually often linked to Friedrich Schlegel, the German romantic famous philosopher, from the late 18th century, and he said, the historian is a prophet looking backwards. This point is simple. The past maybe can warn us if we let it. So I would answer this question of future remembrance with a different question. Not only what will people remember in the 50 or, 100 years from now, but what is worth forgetting. What is worth forgetting? This is not a soft idea, it is a moral decision. Here I want to refer to Yehuda Elkanah. Maybe many of you haven't heard about him. I heard. Oh, yes, of course. I'm sure you heard too.
I heard it very well.
Well, his point of view is not a very comfortable way. I want to refer to his unfortunately forgotten essay called "In Praise of Forgetting," in Hebrew, "Bezchut HaShichecha." To understand it, we need to remember the moment it was published, March 1988. Israel was in the middle of the Jordan Yanyuk, even the terrible from Treblinka trial, and survivors' testimonies and the language of annihilation flooded public life. At the same time, the first Palestinian Intifada had begun. Israel published this discourse was filling with fear, anger, and dehumanizing talk. Elkanah saw these two realities being fused into one story of permanent threat. Elkanah was an Auschwitz survivor. He was a leading scholar of the history and philosophy of science. And he was writing as an Israeli public intellectual to Israelis. His warning was sharp. When society organizes its identity around victimhood or memory of victimhood, it may lose the ability to see others as fully human. And when fear becomes the basic political language, moral judgment falls asleep. This question is not abstract today, and it is not only Israel. We are living through a moment of mass violence and forced displacement, and Raphael just mentioned it today and yesterday in the UN. We also live in a public language that too easily slips to dehumanization. Ukraine confronted us with the large-scale killing and displacement. And since October 7th, 2023, Israelis and Palestinians have been living through a brutal war. Hamas massacre and hostage-taking follow by a devastating Israeli campaign in Gaza, with imminent civilian suffering and serious allegations of war crimes, even accusation of genocide. So what should be forgotten? Not Holocaust, not the facts, not responsibility, not the moral lessons. What should be forgotten is the distorted and poisonous use of Holocaust. Forget the self-righteous victim script, the habit to turning Jewish suffering into a moral weapon and a permanent claim of innocence. Forget the politics of permanent fear. Forget the moral exceptionalism, that says, because this happened to us, anything is permitted to us. Sometimes forgetting what is false and harmful is exactly what protects what is most valuable in a nation's memory. Not individual memory, but nation's memory. A healthy democratic society can remember without living inside trauma. It can defend itself without losing moral limits. A society built on victimhood, xenophobia, and isolation will end up using remembrance to justify cruelty. That is the opposite of civic maturity. And I think this is opposite to what Holocaust remembrance should look like in the future.
We have a few questions and we have the clock ticking. So I have to begin, first of all, by apologizing to you if your question does not get asked. What we can do is share your question with the panelists after, if it doesn't get asked, and then they may respond to you in writing. So I just want to give that caveat. I think what we've heard is that there is a lot to be said about remembrance, and that it's certainly not just something about looking backwards. It's about what does it mean to us now. I'm not going to paraphrase the brilliant words you've just heard. I'm going to go to one of the questions. Here we go. A question for Jay. Would you be willing to share more about your family history? I think they're meaning what happened in Warsaw.
Yes, of course. Let me phrase it this way. Having a family that disappeared adds a third dimension to our discussion of remembrance and forgetting. And that third dimension, which is very powerful in my life, is silence. Silence is a space in which both remembering and forgetting happen together. Not one, not the other, but both. And the terror of the Holocaust in growing up in a family which had been eliminated was the weight, the terrifying weight of silence. And the silence was partly the fact that my grandfather, a Lubavitcher Hasidic Rebbe, had 17 brothers and sisters. He made it out before the war because his Rebbe said Manhattan is the place where the Lubavitcher Hasidim need a Rebbe, and he went. The other 16 stayed behind, and they were all wiped out with all of their families. The important effect of this, I think, on me is to constantly distinguish between history and memory. And I think this is something that's very important because my experience, and I realize that there are varied experiences, is that memory doesn't heal. It can heal, but it can also open wounds. And memory is not a sacred matter. It is a matter of individuals trying to cope with the violence of the world in which we live. Hence, the introduction of sacred elements is something that I resist. I found, by the way, I think the fundamental text on this is Yerushalmi's book, Zachor, which is an attempt to move away from the sacred framework of memory by speaking about performance, that the performative is the fundamental element. The Jews know about history through Seder Pesach and through many other events. In my family, the weight of the Holocaust has been so painful, certainly damaging and destructive, that I became an historian of the First World War so as not to be an historian of the Second. But what I found was that the First World War was the antechamber that made the Holocaust possible, thinkable, doable. Industrialized mass murder happened not in 1933, but in 1914. And in 1915 came the birth of the phrase, never again. It's not about, originally, the Holocaust. It's about 1915, the use of poison gas in the field of battle, Lusitania being sunk, civilians being killed, Nurse Edith Cavell being executed by the German army. It's about the Armenian genocide. It's about all of those things that happened.
It's still not the same, I'm sorry.
Well, you can perhaps...
Not the same about the genocide.
Perhaps you can allow me to finish a sentence. Thank you very much. It is important, I think, to recognize that we will not agree on the fundamental context of remembrance unless we see that it is not the equivalent of history. History is memory seen through documents. Memory is history seen through emotion. Freud knew this, Nietzsche knew this, many philosophers did too. When you write history, what matters is not your feeling, but the documents on which you base your argument. And without documents, we are very bereft. There are ways of handling it through first-person analysis, and that is, of course, one of the reasons why we have to deal with the fact that there will be a time when the survivors aren't here anymore to speak to us. But thanks to Yad Vashem and many other institutions, including YIVO, we have a very rich documentary base to continue. So what I want to say is that history has a job that remembrance doesn't have. It is to take memory and turn it into documented narrative. It's not the same. Teaching history is not teaching memory. It's not the same. Just to give you one example of this, many years ago, I spoke on the First World War and the slaughter of the Battle of the Somme at the inauguration of a library for the British Military Academy at Sandhurst. It was in the presence of Harold Macmillan, who was British Prime Minister and had fought at that battle, and it mattered to him terribly. I spoke about the traumatic memory of the First World War. And at the end of it, a novelist who also fought in the First World War at that battle, called Charles Carrington, stood up and said, "Young man, you better find another profession. You'll never know what it was like. Only we know who had been there. Only those who had lived the experience had the right to speak about it. Find another life. Find another living." And I find that absolutely wrong, deadly wrong, because the meaning of these stories is what documents like the YIVO archive tell us. No one has the story as personal property. What we have is the responsibility of turning memory into history and to realize the distinction between the two.
Elżbieta, I wonder, having listened to these discussions about memory and remembrance and the future, for you, with your very particular connection, what is your hope for Holocaust remembrance in the future?
Tak. Moja sytuacja jest nietypowa. Ja nie jestem historykiem. Ja jestem jeszcze żywym przykładem na to, że ten Holokaust był, że ja tam byłam w środku, czego nie pamiętam.
I'm not typical, I'm not a historian, but I'm a living example that Holocaust did happen.
Ja nawet nigdy nie widziałam twarzy moich rodziców. Zginęli wszyscy.
I did not see the faces of my parents. They perished.
Więc jak mówię, ja tej pamięci nie mam tego, co było w czasie wojny. Natomiast mam pamięć tego, co się stało później. A ponieważ miałam wielkie szczęście, bo uratowałam to, że ja tu jestem dzisiaj, to dzięki wielkiej miłości. Dzięki wielkiej miłości moich żydowskich rodziców, którzy oddali 6-miesięczne dziecko, i wielkiej miłości mojej mamy, która wychowała mnie i uratowała.
I don't have any kind of memory of what happened before I was saved. I'm here thanks to big love on both sides. On the side of my Jewish parents, because it required great love to do what they did, and also because of great love of my Polish mother.
Miałam cudowne dzieciństwo, miłość dostaję całe życie do tej pory, a skończyłam już 84 lata, czyli tyle, że już coś zobaczyłam na tym świecie i wiem, przynajmniej tak mi się wydaje, jak on funkcjonuje.
I had a very happy childhood. I receive love from the world every day, and I have lived already 84 years. So I guess I know what life looks like.
Więc wiem, że pamięć jest ogromnie ważna po to, żeby ludzie się czegoś nauczyli.
So I know that remembrance is very important in order for people to learn something.
Chcę Państwu powiedzieć bardzo krótką historię. Jak przed rokiem byłam w Berlinie i tam było przedstawienie takie słowno-muzyczne, musical, o cudownej kobiecie Irenie Sendlerowej, która ocaliła 2500 żydowskich dzieci.
I want to tell you a very short story from last year. I visited Berlin when I saw a theater production, a musical about Irena Sendlerova, a person who saved 2,500 Jews.
Akurat są tutaj autorzy libretta, czyli tej sztuki, tego musicalu. To jest tutaj Piotr Piwowarczyk, który za mną siedzi i tłumaczy mi z angielskiego na polski. I jest Mary Skinner, która siedzi tutaj na sali.
The authors of the libretto to this musical are here with us. This is Piotr Piwowarczyk, who is so kind to translate to Polish what you are saying, and Mary Skinner, who is in the audience.
Kiedy skończył się spektakl, ja zostałam, to była największa sala teatralna chyba w Berlinie. Było około 2000 młodych Niemców na sali.
When the performance, the musical ended, and it's important to know that it was one of the biggest halls in Berlin. Over 2,000 young people were present there.
Zaproszono mnie na scenę na koniec. Byłam czymś w rodzaju epilogu.
I was invited to the stage at the end. I was some kind of an epilogue to this musical.
Że ja jestem, że ja tam byłam, że ja tam mieszkałam, mieszkam w tym musicalu, żyję i mogę zaświadczyć, że to wszystko, co widzowie obejrzeli na scenie, jest prawdą.
I was as if a proof to what the audience saw, that it really happened, what they saw on the stage.
I kiedy rozmawiałam z tymi młodymi Niemcami, powiedziałam im, że ja tu przyjechałam do Berlina nie po to, żeby im powiedzieć, że oni są winni temu, że zamordowali całą moją rodzinę, prawie całą, bo to nie oni zrobili, to zrobili ich dziadkowie. Nie ma odpowiedzialności rodzinnej, oni nie muszą się czuć winni.
And I wanted to tell them that they are not guilty, those young German people from Berlin, because there is nothing like family responsibility. They are not guilty for what their grandparents did.
Powiedziałam im też, że nie przyjechałam, żeby im powiedzieć, że im wybaczam, bo nie mam czego wybaczać, a jeśli już, to tylko ofiary mogą wybaczać swoim oprawcom.
I also told them that I didn't come there to forgive them, because there is nothing that I can forgive them for, because only victims can forgive their perpetrators.
No więc po co przyjechałam? Przyjechałam po to, żeby im powiedzieć, że i oni, i ja, i my musimy pamiętać i że to jest ogromnie ważne i żeby pamiętali i przekazywali tę pamięć kolejnym pokoleniom.
I only came there to tell them that we all need to remember. I need to remember, they need to remember, and we all need to pass it on to next generations.
Kiedy wyszliśmy z sali teatralnej, mnóstwo tych młodych ludzi podbiegło do mnie z pytaniem, czy można się do pani przytulić, czy można panią pocałować. Bo pierwszy raz ktoś, kto jednak przeżył Holokaust, kto stracił rodzinę, powiedział nam, że my nie musimy czuć się winni, że my nie odpowiadamy za naszych dziadków.
So when we left the place, many of these young people came to me and asked me if I can hug them, kiss, because I was one of the first people to tell them that they're not guilty.
No więc w tym momencie poczułam, że ja rzeczywiście dobrze zrobiłam, że pojechałam do Berlina, bo to przesłanie zostało tam w nich i jest ważne.
So then I understood that it was a good idea to go to Berlin, because this message was left with them. Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end of this evening, and I think we're just beginning it. So I do apologize for that. I wanted us to just have a look at what we've spoken about. We've had our witness here. We are very privileged and lucky to have her. We have had historians talk about the responsibility that historians have to think about where memory meets history, meets remembrance. But I would say that it is not only the historians for whom that is a responsibility, it is all of our responsibility. When we talk about the history of rescue, it is in a way it can be particularly susceptible to appropriation and distortion, and can be used to minimize the horror. And so it is not only, that is where it's so important that historians remind us of the context in which the rescue was happening. No one should ever have had to be rescued, and that we must never forget, even while we honor those who did. We've also spoken a little bit about what remembrance means for the future. We have not yet spoken about what the implications are for an increasingly digital age. Of course, remembering that we are experiencing technological changes now, but there was a time when a camera was a huge technological innovation, and that had implications for remembrance. So I'm coming back to where I began, which is to apologize to you that we are about to begin our discussion. However, that is not going to happen now. Instead, what I'm going to do is to ask you, please, to join me in thanking our guests for making us think and showing our appreciation, of course.
With your permission, I would like just to make one final comment. One, nobody, World War I was a terrible war. Yes, agreed. But there's no historian who says World War I didn't happen. When it comes to the Holocaust, there are many people who are saying it didn't happen. Oh, it didn't happen that way.
Okay, I'm calling moderator's privilege and saying thank you, everybody. Let's meet outside over a glass of wine.